What's up, everybody? Sorry, I wanted to start the show like a YouTube influencer for once instead of like a professional. Welcome to the BWI Live Show. I'm Thomas Frank Carr, Ryan Snyder, Sean Fitz. A little spicy start to the show today. Sorry about that. We're going to be talking about Penn State football recruiting here on the show because that's what we do, and it's the bye week. But most importantly, guys, there is this final stretch in front of us that, Ryan, I know you've been working on and talking about and previewing all season long, but it's the next home game. Ohio State, then the whiteout. So the final stretch in 2025, with the early signing period being in early December, the chips are down at this point, and Penn State has like a month left or so to really put the final touches on this recruiting class from a flip perspective, from a final push perspective, and that's what we're previewing today, along with some of the things going on this week in Penn State football recruiting. I'm Thomas Frank Carr. Welcome to the show. If you are here watching us live, please like the video, subscribe to the Blue White Illustrated YouTube channel, all those great things. Ryan, good morning. What have you been working on this week, and what is piquing your interest as we get started on this wonderful Thursday morning?
Well, we had a busy start to the week, right? Josh Johnson, of course, finally coming out and making it official, which it was kind of writing was on the wall, I think, when he decommitted from Louisville. But took a couple extra days, finally announced his decision. I know we'll get into that a little bit, but aside from that, I think if you've been on the site last couple of days, especially this morning, two big confirmations for the Ohio State game, the Washington game, which is the whiteout. I'm so used to saying Ohio State's the whiteout. Oh, it'll take me some time still. It's only been 4 years.
There's still some that I don't think know that one's not the other. So,
and I think there's going to be a few that are saying Ohio State now, and then they're going to learn it's going to be a noon kick in a couple of days probably, and that might shuffle back to Washington. But we'll talk about that in the next week or two. But aside from that,
real quick, I want to push back on the noon kick thing because that's the only response that I've heard so far is just pushback. It's like not believing that Fox is going to do this. Fox doesn't care about your whiteout. They want the property. They don't care about your noon kick, your night game. Like that's their thing. That's why they do it. And it's for the money. I mean, like it's been fascinating to watch because you're, I think, 7-7 so far on game times, and that's going to probably not stay perfect into November, I would guess, because of all the fluctuation and everything like that. But it's very interesting to see the pushback because Fox took that week for a reason. To put Ohio State, Penn State at noon. So if I look stupid in a couple of weeks, you'll be happy because it's been moved back. But like it's pretty much heading that way.
It's a bye week. We can talk whatever we want to talk about today. The thing I'd say is, I tell everybody, like, if you don't follow the television stuff, everybody thinks they take specific games. They don't. They take which week are they, the network that has the first rights. And obviously Oregon, Michigan is that same week. So yes, technically, if Ohio State loses another game and Penn State loses to Wisconsin, is it possible? Technically, yes. But here's the other thing. One, I don't think that's going to happen. And two, last year or 2 years ago, this game, Ohio State, Penn State got like $8.5 million. Last year, pretty boring game, let's be honest, got about just under 10 million. I mean, the numbers that these two teams produce consistently for Fox are among the top 10 in all of college football. So it would really require something drastic, I think, for that to get shuffled off. And then even then, it's not going to be the whiteout game. We all know that.
Right.
Yeah, that is an interesting situation of two teams that have produced such strong results that everyone has this view of the game of like we're starting the show talking about the psychology of denial almost, that like, hey, it's gonna be the whiteout game because it's Ohio State because of all those things. That is going to be an interesting one to watch in terms of the hype around the game after that Ohio State loss. But I think you guys are right. There's not really anything that should impede those two teams from having playoff implications no matter what coming into this game, because somebody's proverbial life might be on the line in that game. And that's always a dramatic situation to begin with. So let's talk about
well, T. Frank, if you look at the dynamic of the scheduling with adding those West Coast teams, I mean, if that game was in Columbus this weekend, Oregon, Ohio State, it would have been noon kick. Like that's how they would have done that, just because that is they've cultivated and created a primetime spot in the middle of the day, which you used to reserve for Indiana Rutgers. And then all of a sudden they're like, hey, if we grab this money at noon, we can still grab the money at prime time if we have another game, and it's double dipping. So like from a business perspective, it makes all the sense in the world. From a football fan perspective, I know you hate it. I mean, we're not trying to sell you on it. We're just telling you what's happening here. So it's very interesting to see that dynamic, especially with the West Coast teams coming in. They showed a couple weeks ago here, they will play a West Coast team at 9 a.m. local time when they're on the East Coast. I mean, UCLA did it at Penn State. So it's very interesting to follow this. And it's not, there's nothing scientific to it. Somebody was conspiratorizing that, this was to take out game whiteout away from Ohio State, to not make Ohio State play in the whiteout. But Ryan, what time did Penn State and Ohio State play in Columbus last year? I mean,
12.
It's not a conspiracy to anybody, any one team, even though everybody believes it to be Michigan and Ohio State. So that's
last thing I'll say is there is a little bit more talk that Washington might be a night game and not 3:30. So that's still up in the air, but
interesting.
There seems to be a little more momentum there, which if that's the case in mid-November, buckle up or, get your jacket, bundle up. Thank you. Which is what I need to do down here in my basement because it is freezing. We have reached that point where I need to put the heater on more than an hour before coming down here. Anyway,
I held out as long as I could, and then my mother-in-law visited this weekend. It was like, it's chilly in here, and I'm like, it's fine, but yeah, the heat came on in that one. So, yep, that's where we're at in this household. But it's a bye week, and
if I can add to the conversation, this is a potential part of the picture here, but Saturday, November 7th, potential game 7 of the World Series would be November 2nd. So there's that to play into the Fox is going to make sure that if there is a game 7, that is the featured event of that particular day. So that's going to play into when any game will be put on the schedule. As always, the show here is powered by My Perfect Franchise. I always appreciate Andy Ludicky supporting this show, supporting Blue White Illustrated. If you are a corporate executive, somebody who works, and I don't, is middle management a derogatory word? I don't mean it to be, but it is one of those words that has a certain connotation to it. And if it is to you and you're sick of that, check out Andy and My Perfect Franchise to help become your own boss. That is the point of My Perfect Franchise. Andy is worked in corporate America for a long time and was tired of never seeing his family, not seeing his kids grow up, not determining his own future from a financial standpoint. So he bought into franchises. He managed businesses within the structure of a larger corporation, which is what My Perfect Franchise can do. So he's gone through all of these processes himself. He's learned the ins and outs, the mistakes, the successes, all of that, and he's willing to share it with you. So whether things are booming in the economy, whether there's a downturn in the economy, here's the thing. Nobody actually knows, but no matter what's going on, there is some place where there's an opportunity to invest. So he's ready to share his knowledge with you. And most importantly, he gets you into the right business, not just any business. He'll make sure that you understand what you're buying into and you have the skills necessary to succeed. So if that sounds like something you can do, Andy at myperfectfranchise.net is the email address. 404-973-9901 is how you contact Andy. Or if you want to, go on the Blue White Illustrated message board and you can talk to him there because he is a lifelong message board member at On3 and all the iterations before throughout the recruiting era of college football. So check out Andy because he's just like you, a guy who has similar life experiences and he wants to share his successes with you. Today's show also brought to you by Game Time. We're talking about the World Series. We're talking about Game 7, potentially, the whiteout, Ohio State, Penn State. Ryan, you went to the Phillies playoff baseball game a couple weeks ago. How was your experience in buying tickets for that particular experience with you? And I know Greg was with you.
Yeah, Greg gave me his ticket. So, yeah.
Fitz, unmute and come back into the conversation.
Go ahead.
Sorry. So with Game Time, here's the good thing about Game Time is as you get closer to the event. I'm not saying you should buy tickets for the whiteout now, and I'm not saying that they're actually going to get cheaper, but in general, when you look at Game Time and their pricing, they have their Game Time picks, which is what they do when they want to get you the best deal. They'll put the most affordable prices, the best tickets at the top. And the best thing is you get a view of your seat. So it's not like you're going to be looking around a pillar and you get there and you're like, oh, that's why it was a $14 ticket. You get to make those decisions before you buy the ticket, and the all-in pricing is super great because you don't get a surprise fee that is just somebody tacking on $20 because they want to, the venue wants to make a little bit more money on you. Everything is up front. Plus, you can use our app. Download the Game Time app, use promo code ON3, and get $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Download the Game Time app today. Use promo code ON3, that's ON3, for $20 off. What time is it? It's game time. It's
Can
also
I add
time
one
to
thing
talk
real
about,
quick.
Sure.
I will give Game Time a shout out. I do have to. My dad just turned 60. My mom just took him to Dallas this past weekend to watch the Lions Dallas game. I know. Yes. You're on mute, Sean, by the way. The absolute beatdown of all beatdowns. And I did finally get to use the Game Time promo code. I made sure that we got that in there that I didn't use for myself. Yes, I know. And then, my dad got to watch the worst Cowboys game of all time. So thank you for at least saving my family a couple dollars, Game Time. I have not talked to my dad since, and I don't know if we'll ever discuss that trip after watching that game.
Yeah, they're an interesting team here on this on the season so far, where they either win or get completely blown out. And I haven't watched them yet to understand what the problem is, but I assume it's probably that Dak Prescott is only okay. Let's talk, Ryan, coming back to you. You talked to Charles Power. We've all individually talked about Josh Johnson this week, but I know you talked to Director of On3 Recruiting, Charles Power, about Josh Johnson. So what did he share with you about the latest Nittany Lion recruit? Is there any insight or anything that you found interesting from that conversation to share as an update here, kind of on the final word about Josh Johnson?
I think the big thing is we got to get some new senior film for Josh Johnson, right? There hasn't been a whole lot out there, and that'll play a big role, obviously, in where he ultimately ends up in the rankings. But, kind of going off of what we've seen from his junior year, it was a lot of what I think Sean and I have kind of talked about already. Pretty physical player, certainly for his size, 6'2 plus. Really good against the run, really strong in the flats. I mean, it was an absolute ball hawk last year. 4 interceptions, 2 of which he took back for touchdowns, forced multiple fumbles as well. So it's just another guy who brings versatility, most importantly, right? And Penn State loves their versatility, no matter what position it is. They love it. And he's a guy who fits that role. So could play safety, could play corner. We'll see where things go. But I think it's the physical stature that he brings, the physicality to the game, and I think is what stands out to Charles the most. But again, I'll come back to we still kind of have to track down some senior stuff on him because there hasn't been a whole lot out there. Now, at the same time, I think Josh has kind of missed a couple of games, right? Didn't he? I think he missed 3 or 4 games.
Missed a couple of games at the start of the season there, and I want to see it. And I've been trying to go every which way to try and find it. There just hasn't been much out there, so I'm very much looking forward to seeing it and very much curious what I'm gonna find there.
He had one game I was watching before he committed earlier this week. That was, I want to say it was 3 weeks ago. It was on YouTube. So I haven't had a chance to circle back to it. But I think he looks largely the same as he did last year in terms of coming back from that injury and having that physicality. I guess the thing I look at is the defense is the same. So a lot of times when you're trying to evaluate a high school corner and he's playing off coverage almost every single play, what are you really learning about him from all of those perspectives? And it was a team that ran the ball quite a bit. So yeah, I think even with sometimes when you have that film, it's hard to glean too much in those situations. But Ironton is a good football team, and they have an opportunity, I think, probably to make the playoffs at this point. Let's talk about the thing we wanted to get to today in Penn State recruiting, the final stretch heading towards the games we just opened the show talking about, which is the Ohio State game and the whiteout game. I almost did it. I almost called it the Ohio State whiteout game. But on top of that, this is really the time where there's time to add some players to this class, that revenge tour in the flip season that we've been talking about so far. The targets that are out there, whether you want to get into them specifically or if you want to get into them generally, how do you guys see the remaining board as we get into this final month and a half of the season, Fitz?
Do you remember this show a year ago when we were like, I don't know what's happening in 2024 because there's nothing to talk about, really? Jalen Harvey committed.
Jalen just committed.
Like right time. Now. Yeah. And that was it from August, July to signing day. Mm-hmm. Not so much the case this year. And of course, we talked about scholarships expanding, rosters expanding, and Penn State being a little bit looser around the belt because of it. Like that certainly has something to do with it. But you look at the way that this cycle has gone and the guys that they missed early, And the ones that you could kind of see, like Cyrus committed, Brandon Finney committed, Andrew Olish committed, and we're just kind of like, yeah, I could see that one coming back around. Like the ones that seem to twist there at the end, and not so much Olish, but Finney is definitely one. Cyrus was one that, could have twisted at the end there. They usually aren't closed. And that's what I'm looking at with this class. And because of the dynamics of the summer, because of the way that things went with visits and guys hopping on board before visits and then trying to, I don't know, just like basically we thought Brandon Finney was coming here, right, Ryan? We thought for the longest time, and then probably like 2 or 3 days before.
He admitted it. Yeah.
He admitted it. Yeah. Probably like 2 or 3 days before. And that's another thing, but we'll get into that in a later show. But then all of a sudden it changes, and there's usually a reason that changes. And now in this 2025 cycle, there's usually a reason that reason is there, So, and you hate to say it's an indictment on the process or the kid or anything like that. But like when you and I can see it coming, and I think we're pretty good at this, like there's something else to be had on the back end. And that's what we're seeing right now. 4 flip targets visited for UCLA. We talked about that. They've already got 1 in Josh Johnson. After that game, I think I put out an over-under of 2.5. So Josh Johnson was there. Brandon Finney was there. Bradley Gompers was there. And Lex Cyrus was there. Still feeling pretty good about that prediction. And, I think Penn State's doing a really good job. I feel like there's this, and we talked about this on the board before, the sort of gravitational pull where you go somewhere else and it sounds fantastic, but you still commit 5 or 6 months before signing day. And all of a sudden you've got a lot of things that are like taking place. Like there's a chain of events here. There's coaching changes. There's distance with, in the case with Brandon Finney. Finney went out to Oregon again last week. I mean, I don't know that he loves the distance to go out there. But you've got all these different things. And then at the end of the day, you kind of fall back on relationships. And that's where Penn State builds its base, right? Is with its recruiting staff, who does a fantastic job with that, with its assistant coaches. James Franklin's out on the road today doing the same thing. There's a lot that goes into that relationships. And while we want to say that it's all about the money now, it's not necessarily the case. And I think we're seeing that later in the cycle. Of course, NIL is still going to be a part of it no matter what. So that, I mean, we're talking final details here. But no, it's a really interesting cycle because it wasn't over. It didn't end in June. It wasn't like Penn State's cycle in 2024 where it ended in August essentially, except for Jalen Harvey. It's been a dynamic, exciting thing to follow. And I'm here for it because I really prefer this year to last year.
Yeah. Especially when the fact that the Jalen Harvey conversation that we had last year never went anywhere. And like we just talked about, hey, he hasn't committed. Hey, he hasn't committed. Hey, he hasn't committed. Oh, there he goes. He committed. Okay. Then that was the end of it.
He did commit like 3 or 4 times, but he didn't announce.
So when it comes to, I know that this is something we've talked about, and honestly, this is probably still a TBD sort of conversation, but with the early signing period being on early December, coaching changes. Do you think that there's a chance for significant change on the target board that you guys have for the names everyone knows in the chat? Everyone's already said like Gompers, Washington, Finney, Cyrus. Everyone has their favorites left on the board, but do you think there's an opportunity, Ryan, for a curveball if there is a surprise coaching change, or if there is a coaching change that maybe dislodges guys during the season?
I think they're just involved with enough guys that absolutely can happen. Would you agree with that, Sean? Like, as far as a curveball, maybe a player we're not talking about constantly.
I think. Oh, I'm sorry. I thought you were done.
Go ahead.
And I stomped on you. Sorry. I think you look at positions right now where there is no clear-cut guy in terms of senior risers, in terms of guys that they're looking to flip, in terms of previous targets that haven't come back around. So I'm talking offensive line, defensive end, and well, I guess Zahir Mathis is there, but defensive line, like some of the positions that you're not really thinking about. Hey, if there's a coaching change, all of a sudden you comb those prospect lists, and they've already done that. Like they've already done their legwork in terms of like who they think can get fired, and even ones that are just like borderline. You have to know that commit list sort of front and back, and that's why they've got that recruiting staff. So I think that's where that could come into play. So for an offensive tackle, for a guy that, maybe fills out your defensive line class or something like that, because I think that Franklin's never going to say no to an offensive lineman, defensive lineman in that sense. Add another, throw it on the pile. That's great. Because of these expanded rosters and things like that. So I think that's probably where it gets interesting is those positions like that where it's probably not in the front of your mind right now. So we're talking Lex Cyrus at receiver, Gompers at linebacker, Finney at corner, Josh Johnson at safety, Olish at tight end, Zahir Mathis at DN. But filling in those other gaps I think that's interesting to me because you're going to hear names that you're not even considering right now because of coaching changes, and they're coming. I'm curious to see personally when those coaching changes happen. Do a bunch of coaches get fired on December 10th, opening things up after signing day, which I don't know that the letter of intent is going to, and we'll talk about that some other time. I didn't do the research that I needed to do. That's my fault. But I don't know that the letter of intent is going to hold those guys there. So what happens after that? I genuinely don't know. But again, I'm here for it because there's a lot going on right now.
What is, and this is actually something that I think somebody brought up in the chat. I'm going to take it a different way. Steven says if Drew stays another year, more transfer portal impact than recruiting. But when it comes to this coaching situation and the transfer portal, that is another part of this conversation that I think is interesting in terms of trying to massage your overall numbers and then have some room left when it comes to the transfer portal later. So does the February signing period almost mean nothing at this point because you've got to have those numbers? Ryan, what do you think about like how you balance making sure you got the guys in early, transfer portal numbers, and then that late recruiting period, the traditional signing day?
February's been kind of dead for a while. Can they add a guy? Yeah, sure. I mean, there's going to be a couple stud players who probably are committed to schools through, maybe your influx and coaching changes or whatever it may be, who don't sign. And yeah, if Penn State wants to pursue some of those guys, it's a possibility or whatever it may be. I still think it's all about really December and then in the transfer portal, but I wouldn't completely rule it out. But I mean, February has been kind of dead for a while now. I don't know. I just feel like it should be, remember how it used to be in February where Terrell Pryor could sign 2 months later or whatever it was. I just kind of feel like that's how it should be in December now moving forward. Whereas, if you starting December 4th, you can sign whenever because it just, the February thing is just kind of dead.
Yeah. And so there is still, I guess the thought in the back of my head is there's still a contingent of players, those elite players that want to take their recruiting as long as possible that end up signing,
but not a lot.
Is it less than I'm imagining at this point?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. And my only thought again,
I think a lot of those guys are enrolling in January anyway. Like
that's good.
Half of Penn State's class last year enrolled in January. So like it's a pretty significant number. And then you still, I think you'll still see some guys pop up late, like we saw Chimdy a couple of years ago, just kind of blow up and sort of outperform the level of talent, like in terms of offer list, because you see every school coming through with offers after that because there are so few prospects. So I don't think the February signing period is a big deal, especially for Penn State, because they like to have their affairs in order. But I think the big deal here is moving signing day up to December 4th means no more coaches on the road in December. So you're prepped on your game, whether that be playoff, bowl, whatever it is. You're prepping on that. And then there is the transfer portal that is just going to be massive. Like that is one reason they moved it up, is because so much focus has to be on the portal for these coaches that it makes sense to not have to deal with all the crap for an extra 3 weeks from the recruiting cycle, because the recruiting cycle is a whole year long and the portal cycle is a couple of weeks. So you're doing, and they've got the visit window in early January where you can get potential portal visitors in, which is always huge. So I think that's more a focus of resources, a focus of time than anything in terms of making this change.
One thing I'll add too is like Chimney, for example, right? Like, yeah, he wasn't official until February, but like Penn State still offered him in mid-December. So you kind of know who those late guys that they're going to target by that time anyway. Now, again, moving it up a little bit makes me wonder, okay, are there some guys who are scared because now, most coaches will be fired by then, but maybe, there's assistant coach they're attached to out of Florida or whatever school it may be that they're hesitant on, so they don't sign then because they want to see if this guy stays or leaves or whatever it may be. That's the only way I could see maybe, some top premier talent holding off, but it's still going to be like 98% of these guys are signing in December. Yeah,
and your best offensive lineman right now decommitted from Washington a couple of weeks before signing day in 2021. So Venga was going to Washington and he stepped back and Penn State got him for a visit. And I still don't know how they pulled that one off because that was an amazing win, and it's proven itself to be an amazing win. So definitely,
it's stuck in my head so much that's why I brought it up, because like getting Venga and honestly Chimdy and what he's turned into from a physical perspective has blown my mind. So those late evaluations, it feels like just because those two have been so good, give me the like, hey, well, don't forget about February.
There was a time when they would throw guys on top just to fill out the class. They took Corey Bowles late. They took Brennan Thrift late. These guys that, okay, maybe there's a chance these guys hit because they've got size or something like that. They used to do that. Now it's more of a thorough evaluation, and the guys that they're getting late seem to be pretty decent. And like, that's the thing with senior risers, and a guy like Bradley Gompers, I think Gompers is like 104 in 24/7's rankings right now. Like, senior risers matter because you see those guys, you see that growth, you see that development, and you think that that arrow is pointing straight up and at the right time. Because there's a lot of guys out there that peak their junior year and doesn't get any better from there. So I think that's something to look at when you're talking about these late risers. Is it's not just thrown on top of the pile anymore. I think it's been more scientific, and Penn State, to their credit, hasn't done a lot of taking guys just to take guys for several years now.
Yeah, and oh my gosh, I just had a total brain fart. There was
Just
some part of the
Venga.
I got distracted by Venga and ice cream in the chat, but I was going to say Bradley Gompers recently just got an offer from Michigan, I believe. That was this week, correct, Ryan?
Mm-hmm. Yep, I think it was Tuesday, I want to say, maybe Monday, but yeah.
It's one of those situations where if Penn State is high on a guy, he's committed to Duke. That I think there is a certain amount of I think he's currently a 3-star in the consensus rankings. So there's always that contingent of people that only look at the stars and only look at, hey, well, Ohio State only offers 4 and 5 stars. And it's like, well, this guy's good. And just kind of a confirmation that other schools in the Big Ten that Penn State is competing with also think that player is good. Just throwing a little anecdote out there. Let's get into the Ohio State game. The next big tentpole recruiting event. Ryan, we've talked about this in I think it was September, where you were working on this list in September because of the nature of the way the first couple games played out this year. If we don't have to get into the full list, we don't have to get into any specific names if you don't want to yet, but what has this turned into at this point from how you've been tracking it since September?
Well, so, I mean, what I would stress is because Washington is announced as the whiteout game, because a lot of people expect Ohio State to be a noon game. Like, there is a drastic difference between those two games and the list we've put together so far. And I think a lot of guys who are planning to come to Ohio State will eventually 100% see that it's a noon, and it may shift some things. So I'll stress that right off the bat. I mean, right now, I think two guys for Ohio State, at least, that are out there publicly, everybody kind of knows about by now. Thomas Davis Jr., linebacker out of North Carolina, and Connor Salmon, wide receiver out of Virginia. Both are quality 4-star guys. Salmon's, I think, a top 140 player, and I believe Davis is too. I think he's maybe like top 120 or so. Davis is obviously the son of Thomas Davis from the Carolina Panthers. Heck of a player. He's not a Hall of Famer, right? But he's like really, like, statistically, he's one of the best linebackers in that generation.
Panthers Hall of Famer, I'm guessing.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
He's a medical Hall of Famer with as many ACLs as he came back from and played.
But that man, he put up some. I mean, he was all pro, I think, like twice. Davis was a stud. Anyway, we'll talk about his son. But I mean, he's got a ton of offers. Let's see. I think this is his first or second visit to Penn State, or is expected to be his. I believe it's his first, maybe his second. I got to double check on that. But either way, Penn State offered him quite some time ago. They're excited to get him on campus. Is it going to be easy to pull? I mean, he's been to quite a few other schools already by now. So you would think that Penn State's kind of trying to stay in that top 10, maybe crack a top 5 and get an official visit down the road. Salmon, though, Salmon is a player I think that they should be a serious player with. I think a lot of people believe Notre Dame's in the mix there. The kid has been spoken highly of Notre Dame. I think we're getting a little ahead of ourselves to think that they're absolutely the true favorite. He's been to Penn State, I think, at least 3 times now, maybe 4. Camp this past summer, incredible speed, a lot to like there with Salmon. But again, this is also a situation where they've got a pretty big wide receiver board for 2026, and that'll make things interesting long term.
Well,
but I think
did they recruit too many receivers too early in 26? Did they have too many good players on the roster to start this year with as many?
Higgins just can't manage that, can he? He's just
no.
They'll figure it out. I'm not worried about it. And Jasir Rogers, there is nothing about Jasir Rogers from we've seen so far to make you think that was a premature take, because my God, he looks really good. Really, really good. I need to go down there. I need to go down to Delaware and see him play. But yeah, we'll see. I mean, I think those are the two that I feel like safe discussing, and they should absolutely be here. Those visits have been set for quite some time now. Where a lot of other guys, again, I just think that people are going to run into the fact that this is noon. Like, everybody kind of expects it and it's talked about a little bit, but then, when guys absolutely realize, oh, wait a minute, I got to get up at 4 a.m. to get to that game, or I can come up the following week and leave at a normal time. I think that'll shift things a little bit. We'll see.
They don't do the planning like our people in the chat talking game times and stuff for like Minnesota and Maryland. Like it's you saw it at the Illinois game. That list should have been better. It was a good list, but because it was a night game, it should have been better. Again, still a good list, but also nobody was planning that because that game time got announced 13 days before or whatever it was.
Yeah. So, I mean, we've seen the last couple of years, Michigan at noon, Ohio State at noon the year before. Like, it's still going to be a quality list. There's going to be 20 plus scholarship guys, maybe 30. But we've seen with the whiteout games where you're talking, 40, 50 plus, like absolute. If they don't have a scholarship now, they will at some point. So that's
it regional, Ryan? So that noon kick does it mean that it's more of the players from the region are going to make it in a whiteout game?
UCLA was a noon kick, and a bunch of kids flew in from California for that. You know what I mean? So it's kind of hard to say. I mean, it's hard to say. It really, I think a lot of it depends on like individual bye weeks and things like that too, because a lot of those California kids, they had bye weeks. St. John Bosco had a bye week, and so did one of the other ones, I believe. But at the same time, November 2nd, November 9th, the Fridays before, like pretty much every high school is playing playoff football then. Sure, there will be some top players who aren't in the playoffs, but it's pretty rare when you have an elite Division I player in your team. You're usually going to make the playoffs, maybe not be the first seed, but you're usually in there those first couple of weeks. So that's where I think the timing of these two is very interesting, and it's also why I think we haven't seen more guys kind of absolutely 100% confirmed. There's a ton of guys who said, yeah, I want to be at this game. But I think a lot of them are realizing, well, I'm going to have a high school playoff game sometime that weekend. And, especially in the region, Ohio usually is pretty much all Friday nights, I believe. Correct me if I'm wrong, anyone in the chat from Ohio. But for the most part, they seem to keep a lot of Friday night games. But in Pennsylvania, there's a ton of Saturday playoff games. In Maryland, I believe there's some too. New Jersey as well, especially in those North Jersey schools. So I think that's a big impact on, they got to figure out that schedule. And then we'll see, 3, 4, 5 days leading up to it. That's when you'll just have a surge of guys who can finally lock it down.
Is there a different conversation about the whiteout list, or do these two conversations blend so much together that we've covered, what's going to happen with Washington, given the potential flip of the kick time and the whiteout, or excuse me, the Ohio State game and all that stuff?
There's the Washington list I have right now is literally like 3 times the size of Ohio State. And I think a lot of it is the whiteout. I mean, the kids recognize that. Doesn't matter who it's against, whether it was Iowa or Minnesota the previous years, whiteout. Like, that's the thing that they have in their head. So that's a big part of it. And again, I mean, it's pretty well known that won't be a noon game. And that makes a massive difference. Obviously if you're playing a high school game on Saturday, that's one thing, but if you're playing a high school game on Friday and you have until 1:30 to get here or 10 a.m., like that does play a big role when you're talking about teenagers. And, a lot of them have to get rides from friends or family members or whatever it may be. And, when you're driving 3+ hours to get here, that plays a big part. But now the one thing I'll say about the Washington list right now is it is a very talented list of offensive line recruits. A lot of them are kind of out there publicly already. Adam Guthrie, Ben Nichols, Greg Patrick, Carter Scruggs, Tyler Merrill, we've all written about in the last handful of months. They're all 4-star prospects, really important players for Phil Troutwine moving forward. And there's going to be more on that list too. I think we're going to be talking a lot about the talented group of offensive line prospects at that game. Let's see how it shakes out, obviously, with 3 weeks to go. But right now, when I look down this list, you can't help but circle the O-line and say, wow, this is a really good looking group.
That is a great transition to talk about our next topic, which is the On3 industry ranking update. On3 did not do a specific update, but 247 did, which then affects our composite rankings, which are those industry rankings. So if you're confused about why there's multiple different player rankings on the pages I've shown you here on the Blue White Illustrated YouTube channel, that's why, because we take into account the 4 major services and how they also review these recruits. Malachi Goodman moved up a couple spots. He is the #1 player in the class of 2025. So Ryan, I'll come to you quickly, and then Fitz, I want to get your opinion on some of these positional changes. Ryan, because you wrote the article, Ryan, what were the biggest interest points for you? I don't want to say the biggest changes, because it's not always just who moved up the most, but like what
But it's the same
was
thing.
The context of
It's kind
those
of the
players
same
moving
thing.
up? Yeah,
I mean, for me at least, maybe in others, but I mean, LeVar Arrington II, obviously making a massive jump, and I think we're going to continue to see him move up. I mean, Sean, real quick, Sean, have you talked to Charles Power about LeVar or any of his early thoughts? I know he's working mainly on 2026 right now. Just curious if you've talked to him about that at all recently.
Yeah, most of our conversations have been 26 because there's
Okay.
an update coming in a couple of weeks, I think it is. So it's not been there, but I have mentioned LeVar to him just because I think his senior film looks fantastic. Like he looks really good. So I'm impressed with that. But other than that, not really. I saw 24/7 went up. I believe Rivals went up with him a couple of weeks ago. So like arrow trending up on LeVar Arrington just because of the way he's playing as a senior. It's really impressive.
And the amount of film too. And I think that's a big part of it, right? And I think just the publicity too. I mean, this was a recruit that just everything was kind of on the low. I mean, we talked about this when he committed, but I remember a conversation. I don't know, John, it was like, or Sean, it was like January, February, maybe even early March when we kind of realized, oh wait, like he's a serious take for Penn State, because at the time I saw the name, I saw, I know obviously Keno's recruitment back. Like I didn't know how serious Penn State was about him. And again, it was kind of a couple months out where we were like, oh, wow, like this is a guy that they absolutely really want. It's just a recruitment that was on the low a long time. Would you agree with that? I think.
Yeah. They offered, was it Jimmy Kennedy's son in the prior class and didn't do anything about it. Like didn't follow up on it. I mean, it's a check mark beside his name. And I think he ended up at Iowa. Devin ended up at Iowa. But there are offers that go out to legacies that, don't come to fruition, but this is one that happened. This is a guy that visited campus more than we thought. Like I remember we were texting one day and you're like, I think he's been here like 4 times. And you were like, I was like, we got him down for 1. So that's where he's at. And then we were able to get actual measurements and stuff like that. So that helped. It's just getting him out of LeVar's shadow to see him as himself is a big deal, because as himself, as a prospect, if his name was Tom Smith, like he would be a good prospect. He is a very good player. And I'm really excited that he's taken that next step.
Yeah. The acceleration, the burst. I mean, some of those back, coming on a quarterback's backside to track him down, like really impressive. I think the amount of film is having a big role, because what we have like 3 times the amount of film of what we had last year. I think that's kind of a fair way to put it.
He's got more film from one game than he had last year, I think.
Right. So we'll see. But anyway, to get back to where we were, he moved up over 120 spots. He's now number 270 in the On3 industry rankings. He was previously 398. So that's a sizable jump, because especially we also know that the way the industry rankings work, for On3 specifically, we kind of cut off the 4 stars around 300. I think maybe there might be a couple more, but I know 300 is kind of where we cut that off. The industry ranking, because it's compiling information from a bunch of different sites, actually goes to 400 4-star players. So he was 398. I mean, he was a guy who, if he wasn't accelerating like he is this season, could have dropped out of that range. So that's something to keep an eye on moving forward, as far as Penn State adding 4-star players and things like that. Now he's safely in there, where I think there's one other one. I think it's Lyric Samuel too. He moved up a good bit. He was like 450, and now he's like 410, 415, I want to say. So he's another guy who's kind of right on that bubble. On3, of course, we have him higher than anybody at the moment. So it kind of requires 24/7 Rivals, ESPN to boost their rankings to get him up into that 4-star range. But that was another good jump. I think he moved up about 30 spots, I want to say. And then who was the other one? It was Jaden Woods, Sean? Did you talk about
Jaden Woods? Top 100 there now. Yeah. He's a freakish athlete. He's not the biggest guy in the world, but he's a freakish athlete. He's from Kansas, so that's not going to help him in terms of what he's playing against week in and week out. But he's a really good player. Yeah,
he's top 300 across all of the industry rankings. If you're listening on the podcast and you can't see, consensus 4-star, 177th overall according to Rivals. 266 is the low mark actually by On3, but everyone has him as a 4-star prospect. And the athleticism is, that's one where you look at that and go, I don't necessarily mind guys who don't have 6'5", 265 pounds as their future profile if they can run like a linebacker and you can get them to a defensive end size. And Jaden Woods, that's kind of the path he's on. I think that's an area where Deion Barnes has carved out that super speed rusher, the souped up pass rushers that Penn State has gotten with Max Granville and Jaden Woods in the last two classes. Anybody else here?
While we're on that, it's been interesting to watch the development and evolution of Penn State at defensive end, because you think back a couple of years ago, they're trying to go 6'5", 6'6", long arms, all that kind of stuff, and they still want the length there, but they have sort of caved. I think AK was a big part of that in terms of being a 6'2.5" pass rusher that can get to it, and then Chop comes through and he's not much taller than that. And so they've sort of caved on that. As long as you have length, you're going to be able to go with it. And I think Jaden Woods is there. Deshaun Burnett's an interesting one. LeVar Arrington the second we have listed as a linebacker, but I could see him being a defensive end as well. Cortez Harris is having a really good year as well. He's still a bit undersized, but a heck of a football player. So very interested to see how that goes, because there isn't a guy that's 6'7" and long arms and all the things that you talk about leading up to the draft with those guys, but still be a really productive player, and you can probably get on the field sooner at that size, just based on how your body grows and how your coordination evolves when you're that size versus being the 6'6" guy.
Yeah, and to like the length. Because even if you got somebody who is 6'3", but they have 34-inch arms, you're functionally in the same spot as if you're 6'6", and you probably move better. And to me, those are actually, I understand that size is important, but at a certain point, it becomes, I don't want to say redundant, but it becomes, there's a limit of how much more size helps you, as opposed to you're just big enough to play the run now and you play it well enough. And I think that if you can hit that is kind of the modern edge rusher, where you want a guy who is an elite pass rusher first and foremost, and can play the rundowns you need him to, and not be a liability. So the emphasis, as always, is flipped from stopping the run first, from a skill perspective, towards making sure you disrupt the passing game. And that's that's in the NFL as well. I'm not talking about just in college. That's kind of the model in football now.
And there's kind of a line of demarcation here in Penn State's roster right now, because you look at the guys that are playing, they're big guys. Like Denai is huge, right? Smith Gilbert is even bigger, Amin's very big, Carter is not as tall, but he's like, you don't think he's small. Like there's and then it goes, and then you see Max Granville out there and Jalen Harvey, and these guys are 6'2", 6'3" in there, and they look small because of the guys that they're playing against. But it's a very interesting change, because there's not that guy. Malachi Williams maybe has that kind of length, but there's not that guy that is the 6'6" guy, the 6'7" guy, and it's just been interesting to watch.
Yeah, and I would say that this year is kind of the outlier in having as many of these big defensive ends as they've had previously. Anything else here? Because we got to get to coaches on the road to end the show today, and I know that this is a cloak and dagger sort of conversation now for Penn State, so I just want to make sure we close out anything on the updates that you found interesting, Ryan.
The only thing I'll add is just like, it was kind of made clear earlier to us, it's a down year for DN. Would you agree with that, Sean? Like, I think that
in
was
the region, especially.
I think that. So just as far as I don't know if it's size wise was absolutely, this is the thing they're absolutely 100% looking for. I just think like that's kind of where things fell this year, at least for this class.
Yeah. But I mean, going back to what's out there, you look at Jaden Woods, and then you look at a guy like Zahir Mathis. I have zero doubt that Jaden Woods is going to find his way on the field first, because that coordination level, that all those things that come across. So I think that's just an interesting, different way to look at it. And when you've got only a couple of years to get the most out of these kids, and not all of them hit, obviously, it's just an interesting case study on how things have gone and how Penn State has adjusted its approach to get productive guys. And you really can't argue with Penn State's production at defensive end anywhere on the roster. So yeah.
Last thing, T. Frank, I would just want to note, Jaden Woods is now the second ranked player in this class. He was previously number 5. So this ranking boosted 24/7 really boosted him up a good bit in the industry rankings. Like we said, 2026 will be coming out here soon for On 3. I believe we're a couple weeks away from that, and then they'll circle back and do, I think, one more 2025 in November, and then one more time again after All-Star games. So just as far as On 3 rankings go, there will be 2 more updates, but we're getting down to the end. So what you're seeing right now as far as where this class stacks up, there will be some changes, but we're getting to that point now where guys are going to hold pretty firm.
Gotcha. All right. So be sure to check out
I got to get my last one in. Matthew Auton. And this is kind of combining things because James went to his school this morning. But this kid's really good, man. He's got some sort of contact balance, and he plays receiver like a running back, sort of like we said about Parker Washington. Now, Parker, a bit more precise in terms of being a receiver, and by a bit, I mean quite a bit more precise. But he's been more precise. I mean, he's been Penn State's best route runner, I guess, since Jahan. But I really talked myself into that one.
But I mean, those two guys stand out. Like,
they're a year apart. So,
but they really set the standard because before then is like, you're maybe KJ, but KJ was more speed than precision in the route running. So I absolutely get what you're saying there.
Yeah, that is going live, and that's going on the fly. But Auton is a guy that we have as 89 3-star, and that's close to a 4-star, but it's not a 4-star. And I think he is a 4-star prospect. He's might be my favorite prospect in the class. Just a really, really good player. I look at him as a guy that could potentially play early, but not be refined, if that makes sense. Like, I think he's got a lot of potential to get on the field. So I'm excited to see how it goes. There's been a couple of tapes that put out. We've watched a couple of full games, and he's shown up in a big way. I know his competition is sort of up and down, but at the same time, I think there's a lot that can translate from high school to college, and that is why Penn State made him a top priority. So I'm excited to see his progress. I'm excited to see what he's done on the field this year, and staying healthy, he's got a lot to offer for Penn State.
I think the fit with Andy Kotelnicki and the diversity of skill sets, you really like that. And unlike Quentin Martin, who plays running back, which I think is probably a harder physical position to build into from a freshman perspective, if you're saying the receiver that can take some jet sweeps and can get out into some pass patterns and do some simple things, I agree with you in terms of getting his raw potential on the field and applying it in specific ways as opposed to having to have a running back that also then knows how to be a receiver.
Is he the most underrated?
Sorry?
Is he the most underrated guy in the class right now?
I would argue for our rankings, I would say, yeah. I mean,
I agree. Like, to me, when sorry, we're talking over time. I'm bad.
We have a lot to say.
I gotta stop with that. I know. To me, like, he should be in the industry rankings. I'm just because I have in front of me right now. Like, he should be somewhere up where LeVar Arrington II. Like, if LeVar Arrington II is 270 in the country, like, how is Matthew Auton at 448? You know what I mean? Like, I'm not saying LeVar deserves to be there. I'm not trying to knock that, but like, to me, when I watch Matthew Auton and some of the stuff he's doing, he's a very special athlete. Like, he should be somewhere in that ballpark in my eyes.
He is Penn State's 4th rated wide receiver in the class right now. I disagree with that.
Yeah.
So.
He's the guy that in a lot of ways, I think you build the identity of this class around because of all those skill sets. But that's kind of, Ryan, when you and I were talking about this on our breakdown of Josh Johnson, another guy that's super underrated based on his physical ability and some of the earmarkers of instincts and traits we see on film. So that's kind of the nature of this class. It reminds me a little bit of 2023, where they did have some 5-star players, right? So they had some really high level prospects in the class that stood out, but generally you had a lot of guys in that class that were pretty underrated and made up a strong nucleus of high potential football players that maybe had some development to do. Sure. I see a similarity in this class. It's just that you don't have that Javen Williams at the top to boost you up maybe into that top 12.
Mm-hmm. I don't disagree with that. I mean, they're missing top 100 guys, right? I mean, that's the one thing about this class that I really look at is they do not have those couple top 100 guys, which, that having those elite recruits, man, they really, as far as team rankings and stuff go, that it really matters. It certainly boosts you. So I think Penn State will be fine. There's certainly guys they want to add, though, and they're in the mix with some really quality players. Obviously, we've talked about Finney, Cyrus, Bradley Gompers. Like, those are the 3 we're going to have circled. But to go back to what you're saying earlier, like, could there be a surprise or two? They've got, I mean, I feel like they're going after like a dozen plus guys right now, or to some degree. I mean, whether they get momentum, can get those guys up for Ohio State or Washington, time will tell. Those 3 have visited, of course, so did Josh Johnson, and that's why we're going to focus on them for the time being. But there's a lot to keep an eye out for in the next 7 weeks.
I would absolutely hate for the next 4 years to watch Ty Jackson linebacker film. That would be the worst thing for me, is to watch.
You're not getting Ty Jackson. They're not getting Ty Jackson. Let me clarify that. Not you, but they.
Yeah.
But
I know.
he's a stud.
But it was the first name that came to my mind of a guy that was like, oh, what about? And that'd be the worst thing in the world.
But hey, watching Bradley Gompers wouldn't be bad either, because I think he's going to be a good linebacker.
Did USC come to Penn State next year? Because you might see him starting as a
Oregon,
freshman.
I think, comes to Penn State next year, right?
Okay, I don't have the schedule memorized. I'm just getting through this year first. But
They're going to add
one more thing with Auton. I was bouncing around comparisons, and no comparison is great when you're comparing pro players. But I mentioned Curtis Samuel, and then I got pushed back because Curtis Samuel is 5'11", 195 right now. Like, that's what he's listed as in the NFL. Auton is 6'1 plus, or right around 6'1", 210. So like different types of running back playing receiver, because I thought the skill set matched. I thought what Ohio State tried to do with him makes a lot of sense. I just think that was an interesting one that got pushed back because I didn't realize Curtis Samuel was that small.
His frame's kind of similar to Godwin, though, right? A little bit thicker. Godwin was a little bit of a thicker. Godwin was like 6'1", 210, I believe. Yeah. Or not like, I think he's like now is what my point is. Maybe not as a prospect, but
yeah.
They're not the same player. I'm not trying to say that. I'm just trying to say frame.
The physicality, the thing that I get excited about, and just make this a fan hour for Matthew Auton, is that as much as he does have that size of a Chris Godwin, his lateral ability, Chris, it was overdone that Chris Godwin couldn't, turn laterally. He was a 3rd round pick because he didn't have maybe the high end production or didn't have that complete receiver skill set. For like most of his career, he's a slot receiver. So obviously he had those abilities, but the elusiveness, I'd say, and the dynamic kick return sort of ability that Auton has is a separating factor. So when we're talking about one of Penn State's best receivers, most complete receivers, closest thing they've had to like a wide receiver, an X receiver, dominant at Penn State, and this guy has maybe from a physical and a potential standpoint, like a little extra spice in the mix. That I think that perfectly describes exactly why we're all so excited about Matthew Auton. Last topic here today. Speaking of Auton, you've already previewed this, Fitz, talking about coaches on the road. The nature of this particular year, does that make these conversations a little bit more opaque on your end when you're trying to gather this information? Or is it just generally it's different this year because they have fewer of those available hours and days of travel?
They have fewer days, and that's sort of the restructuring of the recruiting schedule. So you're not seeing as many guys go out on the road. There are going to be a couple. I mentioned Danny O'Brien went and saw Troy Hune with James Franklin last weekend, so that's an interesting wrinkle there. Which write a little bit more about that, because there's some other guys going out on the road that's not that you don't like generally think it's an assistant coach. But no, I think he's going to hit some regular targets. Number one, the priority is committed guys. But yes, he's going to be around. He's going to see some potential flip guys. But no, it's a schedule that sort of is based around the guys that they have, and they go regional from there. So you take what you can get in certain areas, and they've already been to Pittsburgh, and they've already been to the DMV, some of the schools down in the DMV. It's not an active recruiting time. So you can't go to a flip target's house, or you can't go to a flip target school and talk to him, because it's part of an evaluation period, in that you can only watch. Like, you can sit there and watch. So I think that's sort of, I don't want to say overblown, but it's getting the helicopter, taking it into the school, being seen, and feeling wanted because of that. It's not going and saying, it's not going to Andrew Olish and saying, here's how we're going to usually like Tyler Warren, because this is the guy that came off 17 catches last week. It's not that, but it is a presence. It is something that I guess still makes sense. Ryan, is this still useful, do you think?
I mean, yeah, absolutely. Going out and having a presence there. I still feel like with time, it's all going to be a contact period. They've already are slowly starting to get that way. I understand why they're not doing it right now, because it's in season and all that. But I do feel like with time, it's inevitable that they're going to be able to have at least a couple-minute conversation with these guys to some degree. But yeah, it's evaluation period right now. So when James goes to whatever school it may be, it's only allowed to have conversation with the coaches and principals, guidance counselors, as he likes to say, the janitor, whatever teacher he wants. When he's out at those games, then it's obviously he's watching the player, but to be at a game on Friday night, it's as much about kissing babies and showing your face as much as anything. We got to watch that the other week when he was out watching Lex Cyrus. But I think it makes sense. I mean, I think it makes more sense than doing all the in-home visits they were doing in December for guys who are already committed and 2 weeks out from signing. That was the travel that I thought was incredibly unnecessary, and the travel that they've cut back on since. We'll see. I mean, I guess in-home visits aren't technically dead because you can do them in January now, I believe, right? I guess. But who's going to be signed? They're
going to be on campus anyway.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, and after that Maryland game, it goes quiet. So it's not like you're going to make a last minute pitch at a guy's house anymore. So that's an interesting one.
But yeah, it'll be busy. They'll be out, as Sean said. It's really primarily all about catching up with your committed players, showing your face around the committed guys, and whatever little town and areas they can hit up that there are or guys that they can flip, or 2026 guys or whatever. They'll stop by those schools, but the focus will always be with James on Friday nights and bye weeks and all that. Will always be on making sure you get around your committed guys, because keeping them locked up is just as much of a struggle as slipping other guys at times.
Yeah, because as much as we've talked this show about Penn State being on the attack, that is a reality, right? That other teams wanted these recruits that Penn State has. Even if you think that the 16th overall class doesn't meet the standard, there's still a lot of teams and coaches that want these players on their roster. So final thoughts here at the end of the show. Fitz, what are you working on this week at BlueWhiteIllustrated.com? What do you want fans to know about that they can subscribe for and get in on right now from what we do in our great coverage of Penn State football and football recruiting?
Yeah, coaches on the road, we're really heavily focused on flip targets right now, as that's what the 2025 cycle is offering. Ryan is crushing 2026 visitors, definitely, but 2025 is what people are glued to right now. So definitely checking that out. I'm going to talk some more half-season, mid-season type stuff. The bye comes at a good week if you want to give mid-season grades, because there's 6 games down, 6 games to go, and there's a lot to work with that. And also, I see some people talking about notifications in the chat. I'm not sure how to fix if anybody's having trouble, because I think that's a YouTube thing. But at the same time, I see that we've gone over 15,000 subscribers on our Blue White Illustrated YouTube channel. So thank you, everybody, for subscribing, liking the videos. All that kind of stuff helps us, and we really appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. I meant to talk about that earlier in the week. I appreciate everybody's support, because Fitz, we talked about this, I think, on the post-game show or on Tuesday, and then it was like almost immediately afterwards that the push happened and people got us over that mark. So I always appreciate the continued support, and I appreciate everybody being here. I'm seeing what you're talking about now from David Bortner here in the chat about the reminders. Part of that is when I create the show. So it does sometimes come up where I am doing a bunch of other things and then I don't actually create this thing. So you get the notification when I actually hit, this is a thing. And that varies by the day. You don't need to get into how that.
Yes, that's.
Yeah. You don't need to get into how the sausage is made.
I saw that on YouTube the other day. Yeah, I saw it.
Just know that, like, as much as I try to be like Greg Pickle and be ultra consistent, I do not have that in my DNA. So it's 1% better.
Dude. Don't overthink it.
It's because you're not a robot.
Yeah. So. Yeah. Speaking of robots, Tyler Warren, I've been diving into some of the numbers, some interesting things about, we have this long conversation on the Blue White Illustrated message board about the Bo Perbula package, and everyone's very fawning over Tyler Warren, deservedly so. But I think some of these things that are happening right now are connected. And I'm putting those into numbers, and I'm putting those into the film evaluation, and I'm going to bring it to you hopefully today. I've been meaning to write this for about 2 days, and things keep getting sidetracked. So that's coming up to me. I think it's a very illuminating part of the conversation about Tyler Warren and the future of the Penn State offense, and something they're still trying to work their way through. Ryan, final thoughts from you.
I'm envisioning you, the Charlie from Always Sunny in Philadelphia meme where he's trying to connect everything. You know what I mean?
Yeah, that one.
That's what I'm envisioning right now.
Copyright.
But
that's where he's at.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, that's exactly what I'm envisioning at the moment.
Am I wearing a shirt that looks eerily similar to that too?
Actually,
right
now?
Yeah,
you are.
Yes.
Yeah, get you the big tie.
Let's look. Bye week. We're going to be watching a lot of high school games this week. We'll see. If any Penn State coaches make it to any certain games that we expect them to, but still trying to lock down exactly where they'll be. And of course, we're a little over 2 weeks out from Ohio State. So still building on those lists. I think, again, I'll come back to when that kick time gets announced, it will really start momentum moving for Ohio State specifically. And of course, you're going to have back-to-back weeks of just massive recruiting talk. So stick with us. Give it to, I mean, even next week, I feel like it'll really kind of start to pick up because we should get that announcement next week. I feel like that should come on Monday. But then, of course, after the Wisconsin game, it's going to really start rolling there. So stick with us. Give us a week or so, and man, those lists will start blowing up. But they're going to be. I mean, I can't remember last time that I'm expecting 2 massive recruiting lists that I think we're going to get this time around.
Yeah, and they've done a good job getting guys on campus so far, but it's like that was the appetizer. Like the real stuff's coming up, so I'm looking forward to that.
That is an awesome place to leave it, and I think you got everybody excited for what's to come over the next couple of weeks. Of course, Wisconsin is in the windshield right off the bat. We're going to be talking about that next week. Of course, our full game week coverage goes back into effect next week, Monday, James Franklin's press conference, all that great stuff. And we'll have the wrestling show later today and more video content here on the Blue White Illustrated YouTube channel. Thank you to everybody who was here today. Thank you to everybody who supported us through the bye week. Just so you know, like our numbers and the things that we're judged on here on the show, you guys make all of this possible, and being here during the bye week, helping us keep going and growing and growing. Love you. Thank you so much for that. We'll be back next week. Talk to you then.